Hey guys, it's Brian. Today I'm going to show you how to install front and rear pads and rotors on the Mike from Autovlog's 2015 F150. The install will be the same from 04 up until the current 2018 models.
On tire, of course, you want to remove these two 13mm caliper bolts. I recommend doing this by hand because they are fragile and they do have a tendency to snap. Once you have the caliper loose, I use a C-clamp to depress the pistons. You can't push the pistons all the way in with this method, but it helps start. You can easily remove the caliper and remove the old pads from the slides. Mike's pads are cracked. Next, you remove the two 21mm caliper bracket bolts. You can use an impact gun on these. Now you can remove the rotor. Most of the time you need a hammer to break the rust free. Before installing the new rotor, it's good to check the hub surface for excessive debris. After installing the new rotor, I put a lug nut on to hold it in place. Next, I clean the pad sliding surfaces on the caliper brackets with my die grinder, but a wire brush works well too. Once the caliper bracket slides are clean, you can reinstall it on the truck. The torque spec for the 21mm caliper bracket bolts is 184 foot-pounds. Now we are ready to install the new front pads. First thing you want to do is apply some brake caliper grease to the slide points on the pads. Now you see this pad has ears on it and the other one doesn't. You want to make sure that pad with the ears is on the inside of the caliper. I see a lot of people install these incorrectly and it ruins the new pads and rotors. You also want to make sure the caliper slide pins move freely. Now you can reinstall the caliper. Ears on the inside, don't forget. Next, you could reinstall the two 13mm caliper bolts. The torque spec on those is 27 foot-pounds and I recommend tightening them by hand. That's it for the front brakes. Now let's move on to the rears. The rear caliper bolts are also 13mm. There's a C-clamp on the rear too. It's easier on the rear because there's only one piston inside the caliper. Hey look, it's the world famous Michael Vine from Autovlog. Once you have the piston pushed in, you can remove the caliper and set it to the side. Never let the caliper hang by the hose. Then you can remove the brake pads. These pads weren't in that bad a shape, but we decided to replace them anyway. Next, we'll remove the caliper bracket bolts. The rears are 18mm. I usually start them by hand and then use my air ratchet to remove them. Once the caliper bracket's removed, I hit the rotor with a hammer until it breaks free from the rust. Sometimes you gotta wiggle them because the e-brake shoes are tight. If it won't come off, you'll need to adjust down the e-brake shoes. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Now you can inspect the e-brake shoes, look for cracks, and also remove excessive dust. To adjust the emergency brake shoes, you'll need to turn this star wheel. To access it, there's a little rubber grommet in the back side of the backing plate. You just pop that out with a screwdriver and spin the wheel from the back side. Now you can reinstall the rear rotor. I cleaned up the rear caliper, now it's time to reinstall it. Spec on these 18mm bolts is 181 foot-pounds. Again, you want to make sure you check those caliper slide pins. Now we're ready to install the rear pads. Make sure you apply the caliper grease on these as well. With the pads installed, now we're ready to install the caliper. Reinstall the two 13mm bolts. The torque spec on these is 26 foot-pounds. This concludes our brake installation on a 2015 F150. Like I said before, they're the same from 2004 up to 2019. I know this video was a little long and drawn out, but I wanted to make it as detailed as possible in case you try to tackle this job on your own. FYI, the dealership charges $130 per axle and labor. If you would like to see another Ford repair, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for checking out my channel.